Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I'm finally ready to do my full review on the Hogue Deka. I've taken my time with this one, A, because it's my knife, and so I haven't been on a timeline. There's been no rush to get this review done. It's also not a brand new model where I feel like people are waiting with bated breath to find out what I have to say about it. But also, it's been a difficult one for me to kind of come to a conclusion on. I don't know if I'm even at a conclusion yet, but I'm just going to share my thoughts with you guys on the knife. I've had enough experiences with it. I've cut with it enough. I've carried with it enough to speak from a place of knowing what this knife is about. It's just more trying to figure out where it fits for me in my collection that I'm still a little bit kind of torn on based on the other knives I have that would compete with it for pocket space. So before I jump into all of those thoughts, let's talk real quick about kind of the features, the materials used here. So this one is the Wharncliffe blade, and it is a compound grind, which I think is pretty cool. I'm not always a fan of compound grinds, but on here I like it. I think it works. It's CPM 20 CV and it's coated. I believe this is Cerakote, if I'm not crazy. It feels like Cerakote to me. I'm not positive what coating they use. I'm sure if you look on their site, it'll tell you specifically. But it's a well-finished blade. I like the way that the coating on it is nice and even. It's been very resilient. I've done a fair bit of cutting with this knife, and the coating has held up really, really well. We've got thumb studs for deployment, as you can see. They are black as well as all of the hardware, which I like. And then you can see on this side, it just says Hogue USA Deca, and then on the other side it says Eliashewicz, who is the designer of this knife. Alan Eliashewicz is a pretty prolific knife designer. I think if people aren't familiar with his name, they're probably familiar with some of his knives because he's worked with a lot of people. The oldest Benchmade I own, that's one from a long time ago. It's stamped Balisong on the blade instead of Benchmade. It's an Eliashewicz design. So he's been in the industry designing knives for a long time, and he does a lot of work for Hogue now, from what I've seen. He also does customs, which I got to handle one or two of at CCKS last year and talk to him a little bit. Super cool guy. His customs were really cool. I think the one I handled had like a button lock type of thing, but he does some wizardry with it. It was interesting. Anyways, he's a cool designer. So that's what's on this side, is his name. Then our handle scales are Hogue's GMascus. It's G10 that they essentially layer and multicolor, and then when they mill it, you can see even more of the multicolor and the layering, and I like it. I think it's done really well. This happens to be the exact same GMascus color and pattern that is used on my SIG P226. I have the Scorpion version of that gun in flat dark earth with the Hogue GMascus grips, and it's the same GMascus, which is part of why I was drawn to getting this color pattern on this knife. They have a couple of color options. There's all black if you don't want the weird multicolor thing going on. There's this one, I think, is the OD Green, and then there's an FDE one, and I've seen, I think it's, someone just posted, I forget which retailer it is, but they have a red, white, and blue one, which was kind of rad. I've seen quite a few, so there are options. They also offer a blue and black one, and that one I think has the satin blade. There's quite a few configurations at this point, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there's options on colors and coated blades and non-coated blades. There's also a drop point blade version of this knife, which also has tons of handle colors. I prefer the Warnie. I tend to be a fan of Wharncliffes in general. This one's almost a reverse Tanto the way it's cut. I don't know, I really like it. So we've got GMascus. We've got a lot of hardware on this knife because there's quite a few body screws holding these barrel spacers in, and then there's also these screws in the middle which are holding that internal kind of small liner. It's not a full nested liner, but it's a like on the Benchmade Bugout or Bailout or Super Freak or Mini Freak, there's a little liner in there that essentially houses the lock mechanism and allows the washers to ride against the blade. So I think that's it on construction. This one is wearing an MXG Gear Deep Carry pocket clip. This pocket clip is one that I saw recommended by quite a few people. I'd seen several people with them installed, and I was not so lucky when I tried to install mine. Something went wrong. I had to send this knife back to Hogue. I talked more about that in my first impressions if you want to kind of hear more of that story, but the real conclusion of that story is that Hogue was very easy to work with for me. They were very kind. They took care of it for me. They even allowed me to send the knife back to them with this clip, and they installed it for me. I don't know if they would just do that for anyone, and if you're installing an aftermarket clip and break something on the knife, then they're not obligated to fix it for you for free. But they were very kind in figuring out exactly how it went wrong for me in the install, and then I sent them the clip so they could see what people are doing with it, and they were kind enough to just put it on for me when they sent it back. So it's been great. They took care of me well, and I had a good experience dealing with the people over there and all that. So I think that's the only time I've ever had a warranty claim with any knife company. So it was good that it wasn't a huge headache, and it was fairly simple with a real quick turnaround. Anyway, this clip, now that it's on, I've really liked. I knew when I got this knife that in order for it to compete in my collection, it would need to have a deep carry clip on it, because my preference is deep carry, especially for kind of smaller knives like this. This knife fits the role of being a lightweight primary for me or a secondary, much like my Benchmade Bugout or a Spyderco Para 3. It's kind of right in that category for me, where it's small enough I can carry it as a secondary if I'm going out kind of heavy, but if I'm going somewhere and I want to be lightweight, it's totally doable as a primary. It's enough blade length and enough capability that I'm comfortable if this is the only knife on me, so I like that about it. But yeah, my Para 3s all run deep carry clips, anyone that I've ever had. My Bugout runs a mini deep carry clip, as do all of my Benchmades, frankly, and so I wanted there to be a deep carry clip on here, and I'm glad I was able to make it work ultimately. It carries pretty well with this clip on it. It carried pretty well with the factory clip on it. When I slipped in and out of pocket and kind of tested it a little bit, it was great with that clip. I just, again, prefer deep carry. And the way this one works, it's been good for me. I will say the milling, the kind of pattern that they've milled here on the scales, the way that it goes in and out of pocket, it does have a little bit of, I don't even want to say that it snags, but it's just not as smooth going in and out of pocket as like my Bugout is, or the micarta scales on my Para 3, or even the G10 scales, where it has just a little bit more resistance going in and out of pocket than those knives did, but it's not so much that I need to like get my other hand and I can still put it in and out of pocket one-handed, and it's not shredding my pockets or anything like that. Just not quite as smooth. So this one's interesting because the Bugout is one of my favorite knives. It gets carried less and less these days just because I'm testing so many other knives to review. But when I'm really like with my own collection, if I stopped buying knives altogether, stopped being handed loaners to check out, and I was just left to my collection, the Bugout would be one of my most carried knives, and it was for a long time before I was reviewing knives. And it has a way of making it into my pocket because it's so light at under 2 ounces. It's got a great ratio of blade length for that lightness. The blade shape is very good for me. There's so much about that knife. You can watch my review on my Bugout. It's a long-term review. And the first time I heard about this knife, I assumed it was kind of designed to be a knife that could dethrone the Bugout as being kind of that ultimate lightweight carry that so many people rave about for all of those reasons I just mentioned, right? But I don't really think, now that I have this knife, that it's designed to replace the Bugout or even necessarily play the same game as the Bugout. I think it was my buddy Sean from Geared Toward Gear who I heard this from before I ever experienced this knife, and I'm glad he said it because I feel like it's changed my outlook on this knife. But I think when Hogue was building this knife, they weren't necessarily building it to be a featherweight. I think the way it ended up was that it turned out to be really lightweight because of the build that they accomplished for being a thin, pocketable knife in this size, and then the materials that made sense for them to use on it, it ended up being fairly lightweight. I think this knife is still sub 2.5 ounces. It's not much heavier than a Bugout, but when I hold them side by side, it feels noticeably heavier than a Bugout. So I don't think that they were going for, like, trying to be as lightweight as possible. If they were, they would have had to use other materials. But it's still very lightweight, and it's still a great size and profile and shape for carry. And so it happens to kind of fall a little bit in that category and that placement, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to it. But yeah, I don't believe that it was like, I don't think Hogue set out to make a knife that could try to dethrone the Bugout. I just don't, I don't see that from this. Maybe they did, but that's not the way I see it. Anyway, what they've actually accomplished is still a very good thing. This is a really compelling knife because 20CV is a great blade steel. This one happens to also be from a US company, made in the US, which is great. They're using US materials. I like all of that that's going for it. And the fact that you get multiple blade shape offerings, a bunch of different colors, it becomes a very fun platform. And so the reality is, like, I like the materials that they're using. I like the size. I like the weight. And what's interesting to me is just trying to figure out whether between my Bugout and my Para 3, whether it can really, like, if I'm opening my knife case to grab a knife to carry that's lighter weight and smaller, not the lightest weight knife necessarily and not the smallest knife necessarily, but kind of in that range of, like, this size where it punches, I don't know that it'll be the one that I grab. And it's hard because I can't think of why. Like, there's no reason why this wouldn't make it in pocket over those other two. It's just ultimately, like, something about those other two knives for me works a little bit better. And it's interesting because the ergos on here are good. I like the ergos. I like the shape of this handle. I like that the jimping is restrained and minimal. I like the blade shape. I really dig that it's compound ground and that we've got this thicker section back here and the thinner section up front. It's opposite of my BGM Knives pike, which happens to be right here. So let me, just to illustrate this point. So on this knife, we have a compound grind. Oh, this is going to be interesting to hold. We have a compound grind on the Deca that is thicker down here and thinner up here. It's the opposite on the pike. It's thinner down here and thicker at the tip. That's because for the way these knives are designed to be used, that's what makes sense. On the pike, if I'm, like, feather sticking and doing more detail-oriented work, most of that's going to be done here. And then if I'm doing something that's a little bit gnarlier with a fixed blade, stabbing into material and prying and stuff, that's going to happen up here. So it makes sense to have a thicker profile up here and thinner down here. On here, it's kind of the opposite, right? Because on an EDC knife, the more detailed tasks I'm going to be doing are out at the tip and immediately kind of behind it, where it's nice and thin here. And then if I'm doing, like, pressing through a lot of material over and over, processing cardboard, stuff like that, that's going to be here on kind of this primary flat, right? And that's where it's a little bit thicker and can take a little more abuse. So I like how well thought out this compound grind is, and that it's not just a compound grind for the sake of making it look cool or something. I actually find it's really functional. So again, I like that. I like the blade length. I like the tip. I like the proportion of cutting edge to the size. I feel like you get a good amount of usable blade for the size of this knife. And I like this knife in a variety of grips. It's comfortable for me in a reverse grip. It's okay in a reverse grip draw cut. In a forward draw cut, it's great. Like, saber grip, excellent. Hammer grip, very good. The way that the clip feels is totally fine with this clip on it. The ergos in general, it's just the right amount of, like, real estate for my hand without being bigger than it needs to be. Like, this really is kind of a Goldilocks for my hands in terms of size. There's a reason why I like a lot of knives that are kind of between the 3 and 3.5 inch blade mark, because for the size that I am, it works well for me. And yeah, it's really hard because as much as this knife has so many good things going for it, and really I don't know what quite to say negatively about it. Like, there's nothing about this knife that I don't like. There's nothing here that sticks out to me that I'm like, oh, they really need to change that. Like, everything about it is well balanced and done well, and it's a good value for the money, especially for the materials you're getting. I don't know. It's just weird that it doesn't excite me. I feel like it should, and there's an intangibility to excitement that is difficult to describe, and therefore I probably shouldn't even try. But I don't get worked up about this knife. And I don't know. Maybe it's where I am with knives, because when I first got a Bugout, I was blown away by it. When I first got a Para 3, I was blown away by it. And I still have such a respect for those knives because I still enjoy them so much. And even though the honeymoon phase is long gone on both of those knives for me, I just still get an inherent enjoyment out of carrying and using them. And this one, I don't dislike it at all. It's been very pleasant for everything I've used it for, but I just don't get that same level of, like, I don't have that same appreciation for it, and I don't know what it is. There's just such an intangibility to it. So, I don't know. This is an odd one for me to be giving my full review on, because everything about this knife is very good. It's easy for me to recommend this knife. If someone is asking if the Hogue Deka is a good knife in this size range and for its weight, for the materials, for the money, 100%. It's great at all of those things, right? Just for me, I don't know that it'll really get carried that much. So it'll be interesting to see. I wonder to myself if when it comes down to... Sorry about that. Yet again, the camera got too hot because it is ridiculously hot out here today. Anyway, the conclusion is what's going to be interesting to see is whether I keep this knife long term. Because I have no reason not to. I really don't. It's a great knife, and it fits my preferences with knives, and it's functionally very, very good. It's just I'll have to see, maybe over the next couple of weeks, now that I'm done trying to carry it to review it, whether I find myself putting it in pocket or not. Because if it doesn't end up making it in pocket, then it probably won't make sense for me personally to keep it around. I know a lot of people don't get rid of knives, but for me, I generally sell knives to buy more knives. And so if this knife doesn't get carried much, then I'm going to let it go, and I'm going to turn it into another knife that is worth trying out to me. And so that'll be the real test, I think. And if you see that this knife isn't in my next collection video, then you'll know what happened. But rest assured, I can genuinely recommend this knife. It is genuinely really, really good. And I like the Hogue Deka quite a lot. There's nothing that I find wrong with this knife, per se. It's not perfect at everything. There are things that could be maybe a little bit more refined, but even then, it's like, I don't know what to point at and say I would change about this knife. It's genuinely very, very good. It just doesn't get me that excited for one reason or another. And so that'll have to be that. Anyways, this has been the Hogue Deka. I apologize if it's a little bit of an anticlimactic, weird conclusion on this one, but you can tell I'm keeping it real if I'm being this honest in a review, right? It is what it is. There you have it.